In our last set of fallacies, the fallacies of sufficiency, the premises are not enough to get to the conclusion. Some important premise is missing. There needs to be more support somewhere in this argument. And speaking of famous fallacies, this is one that's brought up often when it's not really there. Consider this argument. We all agree that college students shouldn't waste time and money on a lot of useless classes. Therefore, the number of credits of humanities required for graduation should be decreased. Okay, here we've got one of those helper words, therefore, introducing us to the conclusion. Our conclusion is the number of credits of humanities required for graduation should be decreased. And why is it that we should believe that? College students shouldn't waste time and money on a lot of useless classes. There is a really big important fact for this argument being smuggled in here, right? Here we have a premise and a conclusion, but we're missing a premise, right? What this argument is doing is begging the question. One begs the question when a key point of the argument is included as a premise, and even worse, often as a premise that isn't even stated, as in this example. Right? What's the missing premise in this argument? This is actually probably what the person making the argument is really going for. Humanities classes are useless. Right? That's probably what the person making this argument is really going for. No point to humanities classes, reduce the credits required. But presumably, whoever is saying that humanities classes should be required doesn't think they're useless. That's not a fact that's accepted by everybody involved in the argument, so it's not acceptable as a premise. You have to convince your audience that the humanities classes are useless in order to convince them that the number of credits required for graduation should be decreased. And you would know that if you'd taken a humanities class. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Now, begging the question is one of those terms that's often used incorrectly. A lot of people say that begs the question when they really just mean that it raises a question, right? When you say that, I feel like we need to answer this other question that is not a key premise to your argument that you need to support, but some separate question. Okay, so that's begging the question. Be careful with this one. If you hear someone say, that's begging the question, make sure that it really is. Our next example is something that one hears an awful lot in, especially political rhetoric. And here's another one where the conclusion is kind of hidden, right? We have just one premise. If you're not with us, you're against us. And then the conclusion that we're asked to draw is, you should be with us, right? But this is an example of what's called a false dichotomy. So dichotomy, this cotomy word fragment is something about cutting. This di prefix is two, so this is cutting in two. And a false dichotomy says there are only two categories that you can be in. One of two things must be true, says the false dichotomy. Now, there are real dichotomies where it really is the case that one of two things must be true. Either it's raining or it's not raining. But in a false dichotomy, there may be other options. So maybe the person in the example doesn't agree with a particular policy position, but also doesn't think that the people advocating the policy position should be pushed down the stairs, right? The with us or against us kind of negates the possibility of civil disagreement, right? So false dichotomies, you have to be in one camp or the other. It ignores any possible middle ground or third alternative. Okay, last one. Here's our last rhetorical fallacy. I can't let you turn in your homework late, says the teacher, because if I let people turn in homework late, soon nobody will be doing any homework until the last day of the semester. So this argument hinges on the fact that if you allow a slight variation from what's expected, soon much larger variations will follow. A slippery slope argument claims that some action shouldn't be taken because it necessarily leads to further actions. Dogs and cats living together, pandemonium, without extra evidence that this is actually a necessary consequence, right? It's not a slippery slope argument. It's not a slippery slope argument if there's support for the claim that it is a necessary consequence. It's only a slippery slope argument if the slippery slope is introduced as a premise without support.